Are you feeling this time of the semester when you've got for so many classes? Sometimes feel like you're buried under. Is it difficult to even find what? Is it hard to organize when you do organize it, there are in your head? Does your head feel totally depressed by the thought of all that you have? Did you know in one day than a person in the Middle Ages was exposed to your life? Is there any way you can stop this deluge of it and make sense of it all? It is. During the next couple of weeks, we're going to study a number of strategies that will help you to reduce the amount of information you're supposed to know and remember and make learning much more manageable. One of the first stages that we're going to look at is that of highlighting. Now, highlighting is one of those activities that is considered an active reading strategy. And we know that ever since the first day that we were together this semester, we've stressed the importance of active reading strategies, not being a passive consumer, because passive consumers of reading usually don't end up with much. So let's talk about highlighting and how it might help you to reduce the information overload. Well, one of the things that we know about highlighting is that it is a task that recognizes the fact that you aren't supposed to know every single thing that's in textbooks. That's just impossible for any of us. So what highlighting does is help you identify what's important in all of the things that you're reading. So what are some reasons why people would even want to highlight? Well, one of those is the fact that it helps to make your review and study efficient. Let's say that you've got a chapter in a biology text that you have to read. You read it when it's initially assigned, and then when it's time for the midterm, you read it again. And perhaps for the final it's a comprehensive, and so you read it yet a third time. That is not efficient. If you highlight your text, you might be able to just simply cover the highlighted material, and that will reduce the amount of time that you have to spend rereading. You see, when you highlight, you are trying to find out what are the important ideas, and that's what you highlight. It helps you to sort out the main ideas from the details and only look at those things which are truly memorable. It also keeps you physically active. And we know that a passive reader doesn't usually accomplish much. It keeps you physically active in a couple of different ways. First of all, it keeps your brain active because you have to constantly try to decide what's important and what's a detail that I can let go. And then it's also the physical act of holding that highlighter and highlighting the words that keeps you engaged as a reader. Everything that we've studied so far this year seems to have a certain set of rules and regulations. And so here's some important considerations on what you should highlight and how to highlight. First of all, don't highlight as you're reading. You have to read the material first and then highlight. My suggestion is to start out, try reading a paragraph and then going back and highlighting just the important information in that paragraph. If you highlight on the fly, what happens is that you're highlighting way too much because everything initially seems important. So, read first and then highlight. Next, we want to make sure that we look at the headings in our text. Remember way back when we talked about SQ3R as a strategy and we were looking at the headings in the text and turning those into questions? That's a really useful strategy when we're looking at highlighting as well. Now, don't highlight the headings. In a way, they're already highlighted because they're in bold face print and they're usually in a different color and they stand out well on themselves. But as you read the paragraph that follows a heading, try to answer the question that that heading poses and highlight only the key information. When you highlight the answers to your questions, you've got the important pieces. Now, step 4 may seem like a strange one to include, but it's to highlight from left to right. The simple reason for that is that's the direction in this country that we read, and so it's important to highlight in that direction as well. And remember all of the work that we did in Chapter 3, where we were looking at different ways that authors can arrange the main ideas in paragraphs? Well, usually in textbooks, the key information, the main point, is going to come in the very first sentence or the very last. But you know the strategies for finding main ideas that are expressed in other locations in the paragraph as well. So you're really looking for that topic sentence in order to be able to highlight and capture that. Oops, we need to go back. Step 6. As you are highlighting the main ideas, it's okay to highlight some examples and some supporting details, but the trick is don't get too caught up in how many of the details you're going to highlight. If you end up highlighting all the details, all the examples, all the facts, all the statistics, the whole page will be a blur of color. You'll also remember when we were studying in Chapter 3 how we talked about transition words in a passage and how they often set us up to understand how one thought is related to another. Many times, highlighting those transition words will help to make sense when you go back and look at your highlighting. Now, this is critically important in Step 8. Do not highlight complete sentences. If you do, everything becomes equally as important. So really what you want to concentrate on are just those key words, the nouns and the verbs that, when linked together, may sound a bit like robot speech, but it gives you the idea of what you need to remember. So for example, in number 9, you'll see a sentence. It says, your highlighting should convey the content of the passage or the paragraph. If we highlighted the words in green, it would simply read highlighting, convey, content. And that's really the gist of what that sentence is all about. Step 9 also goes on to say you shouldn't highlight things that you already know, because if you know them, it's not necessary for you to reread and remember them. So don't highlight things that you already know. It's tough, but you have to try to strike that happy medium. If you highlight too little, well, then you don't have any sort of reference to go back to. But if you highlight too much, the whole page is just a colored landscape and nothing is important then. So the rule of thumb is that you shouldn't highlight, I like to say, any more than 1/10 of a page. And generally you shouldn't highlight any more than 15%. 25% is pretty generous, and I wouldn't necessarily go that high. I'd stick more toward that 15% target. Now, if you want to check your highlighting to see if you've done the right amount, reread the highlighting. You should be able to reread those sentences so that they make sense, even though there are only 2 or 3 words highlighted. It's kind of like putting your sentences that you're reading on a diet. If it does make sense, great. If not, go back and fix it up. Now, here's a lot of questions that you have to ponder. Each person needs to develop a regular system of highlighting that works for you. You have to decide, if I'm reading a science textbook, let's face it, what's a science textbook but usually vocabulary words strung together with other text? So are you going to highlight vocabulary words? Are you going to only highlight main ideas? Will you select some details? What will you do as a pattern? And when you first start to highlight with a, plan in mind, it's going to feel a little bit awkward. But like anything we do in life, the more we practice it, the better we get. Now, some people like to use several different colors in highlighting. They use one color for main points and another color for details and yet another color for definitions. I don't know about you, perhaps that would work, but for me, 3 colors, I spend more time thinking about which marker I'm going to pick up than I am thinking about the content. The most I ever use are 2. I'll use one color for main points and then I'll use others for vocabulary words. And usually I'll highlight the vocabulary word and then underline its definition with the highlighter to make it look a little bit different and to stand out. What's the system that's going to work for you? So, you want to try to highlight enough information so that it reads smoothly. Now, it's going to sound a little bit like a robot, but it still will read smoothly and you'll capture all the main points. And you always have to look back and ask yourself these important questions. Did you highlight the right amount? Or do you have way too much or too little? Did you use a consistent system for your highlighting? If you were highlighting your vocabulary words in yellow, did you do that throughout? Does your highlighting capture the main important pieces of the reading that you've done? And as you reread your highlighting, is it easy to follow the train of thought and not seem like a bunch of just disconnected words? And that's all there is to highlighting. Now, one of the things that I'm going to point out to you is that when we meet together in class on Monday, we're going to have a number of different highlighting exercises that you'll be working on. The tricky part of highlighting also has to do with, do you have a purpose in mind? And so I'll be providing you with a purpose for these exercises that we'll be working on together, and you'll be able to test your highlighting strength. See you in class on Monday. Have a great weekend.